upstairs, please exit to your left. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of Innovation, City of New York, Jeff Merritt.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to live up to that, the hype that Miguel just put out there. I really believe that we have a true group of rock stars here. You know, if you're looking at the schedule and you're seeing all the different panels out there, a lot of times you've got a lot of diversity on these groups in terms of private sector thought leaders, that kind of thing. What we've got here, it's rare that I say that diversity isn't important, but in this group what we have is all government practitioners who have been sort of in the weeds, sort of implementing these projects. And so we're going to be able to have a different type of conversation here. And the cities that are represented, Amsterdam, Atlanta, Chicago, Toronto, really each have diverse characteristics and things and perspectives they bring to the table. So I'm going to invite out my panelists, and I'll explain a little bit about each of these individuals, and we'll dive right in. So let's start out with Berman, the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Amsterdam. And Brenna Berman, the Executive Director of City Digital in Chicago. Next up is Samir Saini from City of Atlanta, the Chief Information Officer. And Meikle, the Chief Information Officer for the City of Toronto. We're going to try to not talk this entire time. We've got about 40 minutes here. We're going to take about 30 minutes to have a discussion, then we're going to open this up for Q&A. And so as we're talking, if there's things that sort of spark your attention that you want to learn more about, or just you want to ask some tough questions, take a little note. And then we'll have some individuals out with microphones. They'll find you, and we'll, if we can get more than 10 minutes in, we'll do that for sure. So quickly, let me just go down the line and say again who we have here so you sort of understand the expertise. So Ger is the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Amsterdam. He's responsible for smart cities, research and development, and innovation partnerships with the City of Amsterdam. He's also president of the City Protocol Society. And then prior to working with the city, he worked with Accenture and Amsterdam Innovation Motor. Then we have Brenna Berman, who is the newly appointed Executive Director of City Digital, which is an innovation accelerator that's focused on cities and infrastructure at UI Labs in Chicago. And prior to joining UI Labs, Brenna was a CIO for the City of Chicago, Commissioner of the Department of Information Technology and Innovation for over 4 years, and she also spent about 10 years working on government innovation at IBM. Then Samir is currently the Commissioner and CIO for the City of Atlanta. As CIO, he's responsible for the information technology services of all the 25 city departments. That's public safety, justice, operations, administration, the airport. And prior to his current role, he was SVP and CIO for the Atlanta Housing Authority. He previously worked with MGM Resorts International and spent about 9 years with GE. Last but definitely not least, Meikle is the Chief Information Officer for the City of Toronto. And prior to joining the City of Toronto, he was CIO for the City of Brampton and held a number of leadership roles in the private sector, including global operations, customer service, marketing, e-business, and IT. So we've got a group that's got deep roots not only in government but the private sector, which I think is important and helps us understand that digital revolution that Miguel spoke about. So I want to start with Ger here and to directly sort of respond to that question that Miguel put out of, this digital revolution is upon us. How is government responding? How far along do you think that we are? And in particular, I want to speak to the challenge that we often get of smart cities, which is that there's a view that there are a lot of smart projects. Miguel mentioned this, a lot of smart projects in cities, right? But have we begun to connect the dots and make that into a truly integrated smart city?
Is this working? Yeah, it is not working, I know. It's not working. Is yours working?
Mine's working, yeah.
It's working.
Do you want me to tell you what you're doing in Amsterdam?
Yeah, what do I think? What do you think?
It's what Gare thinks.
If it's not on, I'll skip
They're
the.
going to bring you in.
Yeah, it's on though, it's,
Yeah.
but it's not working. So can I have a handheld, please?
Yep.
It's working.
It wouldn't be a technology conference without tech problems. All right.
This one's, no.
You're good.
There you go. So now, great question. I think I'm pretty optimistic actually about this. You always see, well, the government is late and responsive, etc. But in the end, I'm pretty optimistic. I do think we're at a tipping point. I mean, for the last year, smart city stuff was about experimenting and about, well, small stuff basically. Now the biggest challenge for the government is to get rid of the government as it is right now and reinvent itself. I mean, what you see, the issue of the government is that we don't have a crisis. I mean, look at banking sector and how they're transforming themselves to digital banks, etc. For us goes that we still have the same organization that was designed 30, 40 years ago. An organization that was designed, well, for paper actually. You have hierarchy and very centralized organizations, etc. And now our challenge is to, well, go into digital transformation basically like every other industry, because this is the only way we can get up to speed and improve what we do basically. So I'm pretty optimistic about the government that we now, of events like this, that we see this sense of urge. I'm pretty optimistic about a lot of initiatives around the world actually. I'm pretty optimistic that we more and more start to speak the same language about these things. And this is the moment to start connecting the dots of the stuff we've learned in recent years. And the stuff we learned is not that much about technology, but it's more about what is the new role of the government. I mean, we're in the industrial era, we created job security, we created unions, and etc., housing agencies, etc., all inventions that were needed to enable industrial era. And now we need to reinvent the role of the government, but also the social layer in between that's needed in a digital era. And I think this will be the challenge. How can we make sure we stop doing stuff that were relevant in industrial era but not anymore, and reinvent ourselves to do stuff that's relevant in the digital era? So I am pretty positive actually, but well, we are at a tipping point that we need to do different stuff. And the best way to start doing this is stop to talk about the government, because I think we need a different type of government, and I'm pretty optimistic that we will create one.
Okay. Now, Brenna, if we look at Chicago, Chicago is one of what I would say is probably the most publicized IoT deployments perhaps in the world, the array of things, right? It's gotten a lot of press and publicity, and it also has made some pretty bold sort of statements about the potential impact. On the website it says that the data will help make Chicago a truly smart city, allowing the city to operate more efficiently, realize cost savings, right? So really bold assertions, and I think what's unique about this is it is citywide, and it's unique from a lot of the deployments, IoT deployments that we've done in previous years, which were very focused on one use case. So, you know, in New York, we have about 1 billion gallons of water that come into the city every day for drinking water, and so we put sensors to detect pollutants in the water supply, right? So we can engage early. A very clear, one sensor, one clear purpose. Here with the array of things, we're talking about dozens, if not more, you can tell me. What do you curious about your thoughts on that approach, the strengths, weaknesses?
Well, I think the thing that makes the array of things different, and for those of you that don't know what it is, with most of you probably don't, I think the amount of publicity has actually been a negative for the project that takes that long to come to fruition. We started working on this in 2009. It's not a city efficiency and effectiveness project. It is a research platform. So what's important about it to this conversation, it is a city scale IoT instrument. So where most of the work we've done in Chicago, most of the work I've done in other cities when I was a consultant before was, as Jeff said, a single project to solve one problem or pilot one solution. And this is an attempt to go scale to the entire city of Chicago, right? 3 million people, 500 square miles. But it is also a research platform. So while the city has defined dozens of use cases that we believe we'll be able to tackle with the data it will collect, there are universities actually all over the world that have defined research use cases that they will apply the data to. It is actually not designed to solve a specific single or set of city problems. It is designed to do two things. One, to prove that we can build hardware that can survive in the outside city environment for 5 or more years, which is actually, and not just Chicago's environment is pretty tough, but we're actually deploying it in other cities as well, Denver, Seattle, Delhi, some other places in the Middle East and Africa. So think for a minute about what it means to have hardware outside for 5 years, not just as cold as it gets in Chicago, but as hot as it gets in Delhi. So we want to test that, because without that, the perspective of IoT or the value of IoT for a city actually decreases quite a bit if we can't do that. And then there's the data aspect of it. We will be collecting, and I actually don't ever get the numbers right, but real-time data across more than 20 sensors. There'll be 500 nodes with 20 sensors each collecting real-time data for the next 5 years and beyond. Every second of every day across 20 data types. That's a huge amount of data just about Chicago, never mind all the other cities that are participating in this program. So the wealth of knowledge that either the city of Chicago, the medical researchers that care about asthma, the people who study birds that care about the migratory patterns of the geese that fly from Canada down south, the kinds of research that people will be able to do is extraordinary. So we also cared about understanding the research value we could create with that type of data. So those were the two purposes of that project. It wasn't to see if by understanding the traffic flows we could reduce congestion in Chicago. We care about that and we think this data will help that, but that's one specific purpose that we feel like this will support. What we are trying to create is an IoT specific urban scale research platform. And so far, because we are not at scale yet, we will be in 2018. Frankly, we have been scaling the tech, the edge computing and the hardware and working out those bugs. We think we have mastered that for this round of where we are. And the data, which will all be public, begins to flow at the end of this month. So we think we're getting there to create this IoT-enabled city sensing platform.
Interesting. So Samir, let's talk about Atlanta. And my understanding is this fall you guys are going to open up on North Avenue there, about 5-mile stretch, a corridor that's going to be for IoT demonstrations, other sort of smart city demonstrations, and a quote-unquote living lab. Right. And I'm curious sort of how you arrived at that approach and sort of to what extent you're borrowing some of the lessons of the approach taken in Chicago or charting a new path.
Sure. So, well, first off, I just want to give a shout out to my dad, Saini, sitting in the front. He drove 3 hours from Jersey to come out here. So, Dad, thanks for making it out. I had to do that, guys.
That's good.
So, to answer the question, so the approach we're taking is, well, first off, we're all learning from each other, right? So Brenna and myself and
Meikle.
DC and San Francisco and New York City, we all talk a whole lot, especially lately, about what it takes to make our cities smart, IoT demonstrations we're doing, what works, what doesn't work, and so we're building off of each other. So our strategy has been, well, before we talk about smart city, let's talk about whether we can create a smart corridor. And there's a few things that we're building into this. So the first is sort of the reality that we think the future connected corridor, which creates the connected city, won't be a set of homogeneous IoT devices. It'll be a blend of stuff. There'll be some 3, 4, 5, 10 different manufacturers of different IoT devices collecting different instrumentation, and that's sort of the reality. So let's test that scenario out on North Avenue. And then let's ingest all of that data. Let's contextualize it, and then let's see if we could use that data to baseline challenges we have on the corridor, and of course use that data to drive solutions to improve the corridor. And what we care about is trying to make the corridor safer, easier to improve mobility across modes, and improve environmental sustainability. So So we have about 100 plus IoT sensors that will be able to see, hear, and smell every square meter of North Avenue. That's a 5-mile stretch. Again, a blend of various types of IoT devices. Some underground, some above ground. And so that's our plan of attack.
Interesting. All right, so then moving north, if you will, if we go up to Toronto, back in, I think it was 2001, Toronto created the Waterfront Toronto, which this was an old brownfields part of the city that about 2,000 acres that they were building and development in the next sort of neighborhood, sort of core of the city, and that is now being sort of framed as a smart city area, or you're concentrating smart city devices there. And so when we think about neighborhoods and we think about sort of instrumenting these, is there a risk that we begin to instrument sort of these greenfield areas, these new developments, and those areas move into the future, and our other parts of the cities in some ways by comparison are falling farther behind? And so we end up with this sort of tale of two cities between the technology haves and the have-nots. How do we prevent that? And there's a lot of logic about concentrating these investments in certain areas, but how do we go from that to sort of scale across our city?
A great question, Jeff. And through it all, one of the things that's really key for us is keeping the eye on the right target. And the target is really improving the quality of life for people that live, work, and play in the city of Toronto. That can never change. So that way you take a holistic approach to driving economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and social advocacy. But the principles that we used, Jeff talked about the Toronto Waterfront Revitalization. It's the largest waterfront revitalization in the world. And it's a 25-year project, as mentioned, introduced in 2001. And really that urban design principle was based on people-centric. What do I mean by that? 300 of the 800 hectares are designated for parkland. In other words, it's been designed very pedestrian focused, making sure that there's a lot of walkways, parks, easy access from any home or business, 5 minutes away from transit, but also very people-centric in the sense that it's not just an elite neighborhood. There's 40,000 new homes that are in that community, and 20% of those have been allocated for affordable rentals. So we've really been focused on making sure that we don't create the digital divide, but we drive digital inclusion. And as part of that, that community has high-speed access, open access, and fiber to every home, regardless of the economic status of that home. And we've gone even further, not only access, but if the home needs even computers, working with various programs and educational institutions to make sure that we're closing that digital divide. So we've applied those principles, yes, to this project, but we've really looked broader across the city. And how have we done that? By continuing looking at making sure that we're driving digital inclusion, we've undertaken even recently what we call a broadband assessment. And what we need to do is make sure that we actually have coverage, connectivity, horizontally and vertically. I say vertically because we have one of the most high-rise development happening in the world. So we want to make sure that we have coverage horizontally and vertically, and making sure that we have that digital footprint, but making sure our social advocacy programs support that. So we work very closely. We have over 100 public libraries, and we've made access available through public institutions like the library, where you can get easy access and actually rent out technology, and making sure that we are using the technology and the innovation to close some of the social issues and drive social advocacy. So that's kind of been the key for us. Yes, we have some opportunity in this area. We've not made it an elite community or an elite area, but really applying those people-centric communities, people-centric principles across the entire city.
Yeah. Brenna, as you're coming from a role where you were running one of the largest IT departments in the US in terms of budgets and that type of thing. Once you sort of put that layer of connectivity down, and how do you decide what you buy, and sort of to what extent what is the role of pilots in this and private-public partnerships?
So that's funny, I was just thinking about this. We started so early, there was very little to buy. So the role of public-private partnerships, to answer your specific question, is actually critical. I think if you asked any one of us how we're doing what we're doing. And we're all taking different approaches, I think mostly just because our cities are in different stages. So what we're building and when, what we're implementing and when is just different because of where our city started. It's not that one approach is better than another, but we all would name partners. And it would be a mix of universities, large enterprise type corporations and startups, both local ones to our own cities and actually startups from other parts of our countries. And that's actually critical, I think. So the public-private partnerships and the academic partnerships especially, I think have been critical to all of us, because this is a very different way of working than I think cities have had before. Certainly than I've seen in my now 20 years of doing work like this. I couldn't have written an RFP for not just the array of things, but for any of the implementations that we've done in this space. And for us, it's been a mix of sort of buy, build, co-design, co-invest. And I think you're going to see that continue because for probably the first time in certainly my memory, unlike the wave of ERP implementations in cities and CRM implementation, pick your 3-letter acronym, cities were lagged in that adoption. We came after banking and insurance and all the other industries. In this case, we are not the lag. And so we are at the forefront, and so there isn't a lot for us to, there isn't a lot of maturity for us to just outright buy. And so those partnerships are critical, and the cities are full partners in those partnerships. We are not just the recipients of the technology, we are the designers of those technologies in many cases. And I think you would find that talking to any of us.
Also because it's about inventing who owns the public space and who plays what role in public space again,
That's
isn't
very
it?
true.
Because when you think about IoT and all the sensors in the city and everything, I mean, you're doing great work in New York also on thinking about it, but it's new. We know a square physically in public space is for everybody to play on, to walk by or whatever. The digital world though, at the moment it's pretty much privatized actually, but it's also public, so we need to reinvent all the roles we play with tech companies, with telcos, with all types of startups, etc.
Who owns the data?
Who owns the public space?
Yep.
Including data, etc., etc. So this is also fairly new for all of us, basically, to find new roles, new types of regulations that are outdated the moment you publish them. So you need to find new ways to make regulations, agile legislation, which is a contradictio in terminus normally. So it's an interesting way, journey basically to design all these things as well.
I think so.
I just want to make a comment about the PPP. So for us, we have the North Avenue Smart Corridor, but thinking beyond North Avenue, how do we scale this thing? And it really does need a true public-private partnership. And of course, we have major Fortune 50 companies that are helping us on this journey. But I think what's equally as important for us right now is our relationship with Georgia Tech. So back to the point Brenna made, having a city have an intimate relationship with their best and brightest university and institutionalize almost R&D for smart city with that school and enable that school to deploy, in our case, sensors, right, built by Georgia Tech, mounted on poles on North Avenue, is incredible. And there's a bit of sort of swallowing your pride too here, right? So a lot of the power of smart city is in the data. It's the analytics. It's the data scientists that you need, right, to really take this stuff that's coming from all these sensors and make sense of it and give it back to the public works department or the public safety department to say, hey, here's what we discovered, a pattern in A, B, and C. We don't have those resources. I can't hire those resources in the city. It's sad, and I wish I could, but it's a reality. So what do? Well, Georgia Tech, in our case, right, has a lot of them. And so it's early stages for us, but we're already learning that this relationship, right, is going to be essential for us to really get the true value of smart city, understand the data, right, that these IoT devices are producing, and ultimately improve the livability, right, the safety and the environmental sustainability of our city. So.
Rob, I know that Toronto was the first Canadian city to get a grant from the Bloomberg Philanthropies for Bloomberg Innovation grant, and oftentimes that's about building capacity and sort of thinking through, how can the city look more creatively about redefining itself and think about new business models. What are your thoughts of sort of how you apply that? So how do you take advantage of that opportunity and apply that to smart cities?
Great observation. We're quite excited about that, actually, and it served as a catalyst. To build on something Samir said, we are, attacking this from, I call it holistically. So we're working together with our Toronto Region Board of Trade. We have over 10 academic institutions in the Toronto area and some nonprofits. And in fact, next week we're going to be launching the findings, some recommendations that's come out of that joint working group. And the Bloomberg Innovation Fund is helping us really drive not just collaboration, but also to formalize the catalyzing of it. So the Civic Innovation Office was launched as a result of that Bloomberg grant. And we're going to be bringing on a couple of leaders to help create the framework, to work with industry, work within the organization, triage, identify the high value opportunities for the Toronto region. I need to add, it's for the region. Toronto being the largest city in Canada, we recognize that we have a leadership role, not a competing role, a leadership role to really maximize, leverage, not only the technology, tech companies in the Toronto area, but the talent. And how do we bring that together? And so the Civic Innovation Office is actually going to serve as a central point so that we can triage, maximize those opportunities, continue to collaborate with other cities around the world so that we can define the best opportunities to continue to make the city smart.
Great. Before we go to Q&A, I want to just go down the line, and I'd love for each of you to sort of highlight one thing that you're most excited about sort of in the year ahead, specifically a new sort of technology deployment, sort of new initiative that you think is going to be really impactful and shows in some ways that the government is getting this, that we're making progress. We can either go down the line, or if folks don't want to jump in, works as well.
Well, yeah, and I'll keep it short because of time. But I mean, in general, it is, I think, well, in broad sense, the data platform we created to do shorter cycles on the feedback of the effects of our policies, basically very generic in everything we do. So nowadays, when we implement new policies, we try to get great feedback loops in 1 month, 2 months, if it's actually working, basically, so we can start testing, A/B testing, etc. The stuff we do, which is fairly new for cities because normally we would have elections every 4 years, which was our feedback loop, basically, and nowadays we start to experiment on how can we, on shorter feedback cycles, actually start to do stuff. Policies for welfare or employment to get people to work, etc. Normally we put new policies in place and just wait for 4 years and then we look at the numbers, but there's not really a correlation between the stuff we were doing and the outcomes. I mean, cities used to be very good, are very good measuring output, that much subsidies, that much money, etc. But not very good on outcome related to the stuff they do, basically. And I think example given for health and children, we nowadays work together with supermarkets, with sports associations, etc. But hey, when we do something, organize a campaign or whatever, are people actually buying different food? Are people actually doing more sports, etc.? So in generic, I think this is the most exciting because when you don't have this in place, you cannot do all the new stuff basically you want to do.
So for me, and I'm going to take a slightly different path here, especially since I'm not responsible for the deployment of specific to tech in Chicago for the city anymore, but so last fall, a handful of cities, including Atlanta and Chicago, got together and launched the Global Council of CIOs. It doesn't include Toronto and Amsterdam, but only because we haven't pulled them in yet. That'll be right after this panel. But it includes New York, it includes DC, it includes Austin and LA and Seattle. And the thing that those cities have in common is they are all very dedicated to how IoT is going to disrupt and modernize their governments and the services that they provide. And what I'm actually most excited about is I do think in the next year to 18 months, you will see a common deployment across 2 or more cities. And that, I think, is actually critical because all cities have extremely limited resources and are doing their best with the amount of taxpayer dollars they have for technology implementations. So the sooner we figure out not just how to share lessons learned and negotiate collectively with vendors to get the best deal we can, as soon as we're able to actually start building collectively, we've really actually sort of cracked the nut of working collectively, which is what that council is about. So I think you will actually start to see the first cross-city deployment of an IoT solution in the next year, and that I think is going to be really exciting.
That's great.
So,
Samir and Rob, quick thoughts on sort of exciting projects ahead?
So I think in the next year, the thing I'm most excited about is the city of Atlanta standing up for the first time ever a truly enterprise data platform that would serve as the backbone for a sort of urban operating system, helping us run the city better, but also have it be the platform with a city SDK and a suite of APIs that we would let loose for the civic tech community to build, for citizens to explore, and really ultimately to help do our part to drive and stimulate economic growth within the city. So that's, I think, a game changer, and it's something we've been talking about that doesn't exist yet, right? But we're really excited about that. Just one other thing that I think is the most exciting thing to result from it is predictive analytics, which I think is a game changer, and we're already taking a few baby steps in it, but I think we'll take some huge leaps in the next year.
Great. Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. For me, I mean, transportation is a big issue, big city of Toronto, but I'm not going to pick an example there. Kind of tied to the civic innovation, it gives us an opportunity to pilot and try new things. We're still going through that process of selecting a project. But what we are piloting right now in our Toronto water system is that we have 1,800 what we call outflows, and water courses. And in our water system, typically to inspect those areas to make sure that there's no damage or any sort of maintenance that's required, it's very difficult to get to those areas on foot. So we're actually piloting the use of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, that are going around and taking videos of them so we can go back and analyze them and do some preventative maintenance, identify some areas that might need some repairs. And it's just really a new way of doing things. And so I think that's a good example of some of the things that we're really looking forward to in terms of real just innovation, just doing some things differently that we haven't done before.
Perfect. So we're going to open this up to the audience now. There's going to be 2 staff members who have microphones. If you're interested in asking a question, just raise your hand. Staff member will come over to you. Just ask you to ask questions, not make statements. Feel free to direct those at a particular panelist. Otherwise, just sort of the first person who is interested will respond, and we'll start right over here. Yes.
Hi, I have kind of 2 questions about education. First question is kind of, is your city using IoT to affect education in any specific way? I know you talked a little bit about the research. And then second question is kind of more directed to Atlanta, kind of thinking about the data scientists. Is there a way, are you guys passing policies to educate people in these fields or to get more people into this sector? Because you said you can't hire anybody, but isn't that the city's job to kind of prepare students for that?
Sure. So, well, let me take that that last question. So, so data scientists, it's difficult for us to attract data scientists with the salary, right, caps that we have within our city. Right. This may be different in other cities, but certainly it's a challenge for us. So, so really we have no choice, right, but to reach out to various communities to find that talent. It just so happens that Georgia Tech is highly interested in working with us and on addressing resolving urban challenges. And they have huge pipeline of data scientists that it's so easy. The other thing is Georgia Tech, I didn't mention, is in the backyard of North Avenue, literally. So Georgia Tech is seeing North Avenue as quite literally a living lab for them, where they can build stuff right in a classroom and then just stick it on in the open environment, right, on the right of way. So yeah, we're gonna probably stick with the university play. There's not much else, right, that we can do to attract talent at this point, but maybe things will change, at a later point.
So to address your question about the array of things in education, or IoT in general, so one, this is a little ancillary, but there is a complementary high school science curriculum where and I think it's in the junior year of high school, as we roll it out, every neighborhood that we're installing the array of things in, whether it's 1 or 2 high schools, whatever high schools are in that same neighborhood, in the science classes, they actually build a high school version of the array of things. It is an open source instrument, so you could go and build one. There are actually some folks in the IoT meetup in Amsterdam that are building some. And they build a version of the array of things. They install it in or around their high school, like on the grounds, and collect similar data. And then in their biology classes, compare that data to the data we're collecting out in their community and use that as a way within the curriculum, both to increase the STEM skills that they're learning and what they know about their community based on that data. So that's one of the ways that we're using IoT to engage in the education process in the schools in Chicago. One of the ways we're actually using the data from Array of Things, though, to improve more like the access to education in Chicago. So like a lot of cities, but in Chicago in particular, we have really high rates of asthma in specific neighborhoods. And so one of the things that we're looking at is as wind patterns change, and this is a very small thing, as little as changing the door that students are using on a given day, depending on where the wind patterns are and where pollen rates are, having kids enter and leave schools from a different door than you might otherwise release them from can actually make it easier, or changing the path that kids follow from school can actually decrease specific rates of asthma attacks on given days so that they have less absences. So pairing absentee rates with environmental data to drive down absentee rates so that, the more you're in school, the more you're learning.
Fascinating. Let's go to the back here. Yes?
Thanks, Jeff. Danny Fuchs from the Department of City Planning here in New York. First of all, thank you guys all for this great panel. You're really sort of heroes in city government. And I'll ask a question mostly for government, which is, how are you grappling with, frankly, entrenched middle management in the change of things? There are a lot of people in the middle of government who are trying to change things, but it's one thing to do it from the top and a sort of senior position that you guys are in, and you see that increasingly. You also see it from the bottom where sort of technologists are coming in and trying to change things, but frequently it's that sort of layer of civil servants in the middle of government that see their jobs fundamentally changing very quickly. How are you grappling with that in your cities? What are the challenges that you're seeing, and maybe even some opportunities and lessons learned for those of us in city government?
So I have to say, and this one, I love that question because it is that middle management layer. So we began deploying predictive analytics over 4 years ago in Chicago, and we became a little bit famous, might be the wrong word, but for like a year I was known as the rat lady because we did predictive rat baiting first, of all things to start with, rats. Why we started with rats, and we have a white paper out there about lessons learned, is because the key person, and yes, I will talk about the importance of the mayor embracing data and having great data scientists, whether they're your own or through partners, because Samir is right about that, you have to have the skills. The key person in the adoption of predictive analytics is the middle manager who owns the specific service. And one of the key reasons we started with rat baiting, and there were some others, right? There's no constituents for rats, right? No one was gonna fight us on that. The woman who owns that service, her name is Josie Cruz. You can find her on YouTube talking about this. She's a 25-year veteran of the city of Chicago now, was fascinated. Like, we went to her and we're like, we see these patterns in your data. I can't explain them. I don't know the first thing about rat baiting. And I'm like, but our data's telling us you should bait here. And she's like, I get these suggestions, but why this one? She was really fascinated. And she was a willing participant after just a couple of conversations. And that was why we went there first. And so to your point, you need that, and that is a critical success factor for us in Chicago around analytics, is either having or eventually winning over the middle manager who owns the service when you are implementing predictive analytics. And that surprised us. Everyone will tell you you have to have ownership at the top, the right skills at the bottom. We were surprised about that ownership at the middle level. And as we've done other things, we have middle managers who are going to school at night and becoming data scientists. It's kind of gotten a little crazy. When we have hit someone who isn't into it, there's some carrot and stick, all those things you have always heard about. We have been able to transform our culture so much in Chicago that now it's, the savings have been such in the places that we piloted first that they can't get their budget through our annual budget process without showing what their data-driven plan is. So now it's not that, well, I see my job changing, I'm not going this way. They can't keep their job without showing the role data is going to play as a management tool for them going forward now. And I think as almost anyone in city government knows, if you don't have the money, right, the budget office is often more powerful than the mayor's office occasionally, because it's the money. So we've been able to adjust our culture that much by linking the data to the money.
I would say a quick remark maybe on it, but it's, I don't think it's only middle management. I think nowadays I divide it people who get it and people who don't get it, basically. And up to now we're at the point that we do coalition of the willing type of stuff. Because people want to, nice, enthusiastic, but I think in Amsterdam we just started our 10-year digital transformation process, basically. But nowadays it's a bit different. You get it or you don't get it. When you don't get it, basically we're going to help you find a job which you do get.
Rob, do you want to add anything before we wrap?
Sure, I'll keep it quick. I think it's a great question. As we're establishing our Civic Innovation Office, one thing we recognize is it's not just about a pilot or a technology, but it's really, when you're talking innovation, it's about attitudes, mindsets, and behaviors. And how do we foster that culture? A quick example of that is within driving open government and open data, you tend to have sometimes middle management a little hesitant because how's this data going to be used against me? And so what we've done is we've partnered with academic institutions, utilize their 3D visualization classes. So instead of going, let's say, straight to open, let them see some of the analytics, the results, the potential. And it's amazing once they see some of those examples, it's easier in the change management and the buy-in process. And we've been using, instead of focusing on all the ones that aren't changing or resisting, let's pick a few that are and really showcase, share that, and showing the benefits of that. And we've been able to make some traction, not saying we've arrived, but that's kind of the journey that we're taking. Let's focus on, getting the right attitudes and mindsets so that we can accelerate innovation beyond a pilot.
Great. Thank you all for joining for this conversation. We will be keeping this discussion sort of alive among us all and online. I encourage you all to sort of find us if you have additional questions, and thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again the Chairman, Global Futures Group, Jerry Hulton.
Good job.
Supposed to run off now.
I'm not on. I'm on now. Okay. Thank you. So it's been a great day. I want to thank you all for being here. I'll give you a little heads up on what's next. So there's a great event, a reception at HITN. It's right over there. If you swim, it's pretty close. But if you walk, it's quite a walk. So there will be buses right when you step out the front of the door. Hello, thank you. And so there will be a bus and buses, but it's a nice day, so you may want to walk because you're going to see New Lab, and you're going to see Steiner Studios, and you're going to see where the urban farms are. So that's one thing you could do. Secondly, tomorrow. Tomorrow's a good day. So we have Columbus, Ohio here to talk about how they won the $50 million grant for smart transportation. Dan Doctoroff's here in the afternoon. Talk about Google and intersection and his role in teaming up with Michael Bloomberg when Michael was mayor. So it's a great afternoon tomorrow, a great day tomorrow. Then on Friday, again, we have a team here from India. We have Alicia Glenn, the deputy mayor in the current administration, here to talk about innovation, housing, things that are important to her that smart cities relate to. We've got eBay here. We've got Abby Joseph Cohen, who you remember called things right in 2000, is one of those who said smart cities are where the future is. So she's going to come here from Wall Street to talk to us. It's going to be 2 more great days, and then the Saturday is a STEM morning session with young high school students, chance to talk, let them see the future. And then the afternoon a jobs fair, so we're beginning to get young people the idea of where's my job and how can I do this. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, great things to do. upstairs, Dugal 2 here, Dugal 1 programs on the app, so feel free to use it. So, you know, I said in the morning, I'd really like you to learn. There's a lot here to learn. We got these great sponsors that have showing you what they're doing. Microsoft, walk through that whole session. Union Point, look what they're doing with development and smart. The Netherlands, Deloitte is a great sponsor. The Smart Dubai, and talk to the Dubai team about what they're doing, because they're doing amazing things in Dubai. Secondly, meet with each other, connect, network. There's a lot of brain power here. There's people that know tech, there's people that know business, there's people that know finance, city government. Match them up, figure out what you're going to do, and most of all, figure out where you're going to have impact. You've heard it from more than one speaker. We've come to a point where people are asking, what really changes in my life if I do a smart city? So think about how you affect how a citizen like you has a better life in New York or your city or around the world. I can't be too dramatic about how important this is between now and 2050. The world does not work unless you solve it. So I'm counting on you. So finally, getting here tomorrow, there is a smart water taxi, 34th Street, right? So you can pick up a water taxi. It's actually the fastest way to get here. Lyft, if you type in smart cities on Lyft, get $5 off. So use Lyft to get over here. And finally, they promised me more coffee. We'll be here. So hopefully no more long lines tomorrow. So it's going to be a great day again tomorrow, cool again like this. Have a good time. We'll see you tomorrow. Have fun at the parties. And again, thanks for being here. Change the world. Bye-bye.